I never went this way. I always used to go there to the parking lot, exit, and then like one time we were walking from different buildings. I was following teacher. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah, and the book fair is going on today too. All right, Troy, I should start. All right, hello friends. Good to see everybody today. Hello people on the internet, wherever you might be. My name is Jason King. I'm a professor of geography and mathematics. And for the last, how long has it been, Troy? Like 10, 15 years? I don't know. I've been kind of giving a talk on something that's a little bit Halloween-like on this time and place. So hey, why not do one today as well? So, good to see everybody today. Today I'm talking about the cemeteries of South Chicagoland. Reason that I'm making South Chicagoland and not all of Chicagoland is because I took a look at my slide deck. It's 128 slides, and I had to do something about that. So, anyway, this is the kind of talk that I never want to say, like, what interests you about this? Because you're either interested in it or you're not. And if you're not, there's really no way to explain it to somebody that is. It's been something that's been kind of interesting to me for a while. So why are we talking about these things at all? Why are these things that are in any way, shape, or form moving to us? I, of course, don't have any answers. I don't know anything about anything. But I have a couple of ideas in general as far as why these things are the way they are. This is a picture I took at St. Gabriel's Cemetery, which is in Oak Forest. It speaks a little bit about to what ultimately drives us to be interested in these things. Close-up of the words. One of the reasons maybe that these are interesting is they teach us what's really important in the grand scheme of things. What is it that really stands out as being important things in a world that's full of extraneous bothers, concerns, worries about things that maybe are not as relevant. This is one that I found, funny enough, not in a cemetery, but in a place that's kind of related to it in Morocco, Indiana. Despite its name, it's kind of in the fringes of Chicagoland. They're places that don't really change much. You can go to one, and for the most part, you're going to see basically the same stuff that you will any other time. They're one of the rare few places in the world that are relatively quiet, large, and free. One of the things that's happening in the world, but in the United States in general, is the loss of the third place. That is, most people have two places they go to. They go to their jobs, they go to their house, and the third place used to be bowling alleys, churches, some other form of community that's basically lost. In a way, these were like third places in the 19th century. They remind us of where we came from, and they remind us of where we're going. Sorry, spoiler alert, everybody. But unless if Elon figures out a way for immortality. So here's a general menu of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking a little bit about why these things are interesting, what we can learn about them. We're going to talk about some brief cemetery history around South Chicagoland especially. Some interesting cemeteries in our area. If we have time, which it's a 50-50 shot with me, we're going to talk about an exceptionally tragic story of a woman named Rhoda Deary. So first, what can we learn about all this stuff? If this is something that's interesting to you and you're on social media, there's a Facebook page. It's a little bit small. It's where I get some of my information from. It's kind of nifty. So what can we learn from these? Let's take a look at some images and see what we can tell about cultures around us from looking at these. First thing, this is one of the oldest headstones that I've found in the area. I suspect that it's not actually a headstone, but just a monument. Chief and being, this is one that was from the Revolutionary War, right? The only Revolutionary War monument that I know of anywhere in the area. It's on Wolf Road, about 191st. It's right across from like the Aurelio's Pizza right there. A couple of other things that are interesting in the area. You can see in the background there's a Civil War monument. Civil War monuments, you can usually tell them they're all very, very kind of formulaic. But looking around, you can find some really interesting things that have essentially been lost to our understanding of history. What do we notice about this one, for example? You might not be able to tell. It might be hard to read the words. looks like it's in French. Is it in French? Yeah, whoever said that. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this one is in French. Yet today you will of course find few, if any, French speakers native in the area. This one is a little bit south in Kankakee. I found this one. This is one in Lamont, right across from a playground. My kids went to the playground. I'm like, I wonder if I can go across the street, take a look around. I did not. I had to wait till after later because my kids, funny enough, don't want to go places like this. But the monuments are in Swedish there. Kind of building up the suspense for our next one. This was at the end of the Wapansi Glacial Trail, one of my favorite trails to do in the area in spring or in fall. Summer, it's way too hot. Winter, the wind just kind of howls right through you. Not a lot of fun. At the end of a bridge, there's Wilton Sumter Cemetery. This was what it looked like when I went there the first time. You can even see the old train tracks that had been gone for probably 50, 60 years. They retain that, the way that just they make the snow appear in some spots and don't in other spots is kind of unique. This is the one that I want to focus on. Take a look at the headstone on the left. What do we notice about this? What makes this one a little bit unusual? Carlos, I'm especially looking at you because we went over something like this in class once.
I'm trying to remember. There's three people, three engravings.
There are three, that's true. Which one of these things is not like the other? Which one of these is, I don't want to say does not belong, but like which one is unusual? The last one is in German. The other two are in English. What does that inform us about this? What do we notice about the dates on this?
They kind of Americanized like as the years.
Yes. The first one that died was in German, the next two were in English. It's possible that this is just the way that things go. People learn new languages, they learn the language. These are probably of an immigrant family, either first or second generation. But there's another aspect to this. What was going on, say for example, in the late 1910s and 1920s that was not going on in 1910? World War I. World War I, when we think about interns, like not you just graduated from college and you need a job, but interns meaning people that were forcibly arrested and put into labor camps or something like that. This happened more in World War II with Japanese Americans, but it also happened in World War I with German Americans. We'll come back to this one in a second. A picture from one of these internment camps at Camp Douglas. This is a spot that, if you know where White Sox Park is right now, I've kind of lost, I think it's Guaranteed Rate Field now. It's across the street, it's across I-94. This is where you can find Camp Douglas today. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, this was an internment camp for Germans. About 6,000 total Germans were interned in these places. But this is another one kind of related to this. You'll notice that one of these is, well, they're both in English, but the words at the bottom are in German. What else do you notice about this? Besides the fact that it's half English, half in German. Maybe I should just tell you, maybe this isn't the best time for a guessing game. Do you notice that Catherine Baux says his wife, but Phillips is not her husband? You can learn a lot about gender roles, about the way that culture is organized from looking at things like this. And one of the things about a headstone, these don't change. We don't necessarily talk about historical revisionism when this is something that is essentially not going to change much according to time and tide. This is where you can find Camp Douglas today. Kind of a quick side note, this was something kind of interesting. Do you know where people in the 20th century got headstones from? Like, would you just go to a store and buy one? Would you? Good guess, make them. Stonemasonry was kind of hard for a lot of people, pun not intended. You'd buy them from a Sears catalog. So this was one that I found from 1919. And yeah, today you can buy some headstones from Amazon, I know. And back in the day, you would buy one from a Sears catalog. It would come on a rail, and they would take the whole thing off. In case you're wondering how much these are, $300 in 1919 dollars, it's about $6,000 today. So I was kind of surprised, like a little marker is normally about 2,500. These are significantly larger, so these might actually be cheaper back then than they are today. I'm not sure. I'm going to have this availability, but if you want to take a look at that, that's where I found it. All I did to find this was I just went to archive.org and typed in Sears catalog with headstones, and you can look through the whole thing, all 75 pages of it if you want, even flip through it. It is astounding. Many of the headstones that we look at and think are unique, you can find versions of them in this Sears catalog. So people were probably, especially in the pioneer days, they were just looking through these and saying, okay, yeah, let's pick that one out. St. James of the Sag, Anthony, I know you're familiar with this one probably. This is about 5 minutes from here, and it's one of the oldest cemeteries in the region. This was one that was built for largely Irish immigrants who were building the I&M Canal. This is an area that's a little bit hilly, and it depends on who you believe, but it's possible this is the oldest headstone in Cook County. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at every single one. There are disputes about this. But this was somebody that was working on the I&M Canal at the time when they passed. The I&M Canal, big surprise, was an incredibly dangerous form of work. So this was done for very low money, was done extremely dangerously, and so the rates of casualty were extremely high doing this. Anyway, so little things you can notice about cemetery headstones just looking through the area. Let's talk about some brief Chicago history of these things. It wasn't until about the 1830s that headstones and cemeteries got formalized. Before then, America was a much more rural place, and most people were buried in churchyards. You can still find some churchyard. The term is kind of a euphemism for a cemetery in the 19th century. You can still find some of these around. This is one. It's on Sauk Trail, and I want to say Cicero. I always thought it was Matson. I looked it up for this thing, and it's Richton Park. But it's kind of right by that. Is that a Sam's Club right there? Anyway, it's an old cemetery, and it's attached to a church. The cemetery itself is pretty small. This is how, if anybody wasn't buried on family plots of land, they'd probably be buried someplace like this. But as America urbanized and as Chicagoland urbanized, this became more and more problematic for people. Every decade from the 1840s through the 1910s saw Chicago's population increase by at least 50%, and I'm including the Chicago fire in that. Most decades it doubled, and by 1910 it was about 1.7 million people. There wasn't room for the churchyards anymore, and people often moved. So what would be done in a time like this? One of the things you'll notice if you take a look at where cemeteries are in the 21st century, this is an incomplete list. This was just me going on Google and seeing like where all these are. What do we notice about the locations of cemeteries today in Chicagoland? There's more on the north side. That is definitely true. What else did we notice? These are, there's a lot more Catholic ones, but that might just be a bias. I'm not sure. Are there a lot in the city itself? There's very few in the city itself. One of the reasons for that is just pure economics. If you have the choice of putting in a skyscraper or putting in a cemetery, which would make more economic sense to do? Yeah, obviously the skyscraper, right? Anything besides a cemetery, which by its very nature doesn't bring in a lot of revenue. As a result, cemeteries were put on the very far reaches of Chicagoland early in the day, and then what eventually happened was houses were put around them. When we think about some of the large cemetery blocks in this area, in say, for example, Mount Greenwood, or Alsip is a perfect example. A long time ago, these were on the far, far reaches of what we would consider Chicagoland. Eventually, just because of urban sprawl, people moved out and around them. And then after that, the cemeteries went even further and further out today. One of the largest ones that's currently expanding is in Elwood, Illinois, for example, which is barely in Chicagoland by modern standards at all. Urban America had other problems. That is, a lot of times people moved to urban areas that didn't have close family or close friends around. As a result, people would die without family around, and the idea of the morgue was created. Morgue comes from the French word morguer, which means to stare. One of the ways that 19th century people in France used to get entertainment, as bizarre as it was they would go down to the morgue and look at who was out on display. These were people that passed with nobody else knowing who they were, where they could be found. A lot of the concepts around 19th century death and dying come from the Victorian era. Some of this comes from Queen Victoria herself and some of her predilections towards death and dying. But others of it came from the time and place that these occurred in. The Crimean War in 1854, I could have a whole talk on the Crimean War and how things changed as a result of it, but it's just one of these times it's lost to history. In the 19th century, British soldiers fought in what today would be called Ukraine. And in Ukraine, that was a long ways away from potential places of burial that family could go to. These usually bring about a sense of closure for people. That is, if someone passes, the funeral is supposed to give you some sense of psychological closure. What if there is no funeral? What if somebody died thousands of miles away and you never see them? We'll come back to this in a second. You would have seances for these things. The idea of the seance, the idea of getting together with kind of a ritualism, this was created shortly after the Crimean War in Britain and after the American Civil War in the United States. After the American Civil War, many people were buried far from home in places they would never be able to see their family. And as a result, the idea of the seance, of not having an actual funeral for which to mourn somebody, became kind of like a way of dealing with this. The people that were burying these were sometimes not given high wages or had high standards of living or were seen with significant social prestige. Some of these ended up taking bodies and digging them up and selling them for medical supply purposes. This is at a time, for example, when a skeleton was very useful for people that were just learning surgery, just learning medicine or anatomy. One of the most famous of these in Chicago is H.H. Holmes. If you know your Chicago history, maybe you know about him. A lot of the stories that go along with H.H. Holmes are probably not entirely true. He was definitely a mass murderer. He probably didn't kill 100 or 200 people. He was known as being a liar that exaggerated his tales, and the newspapers at the time were happy to let them do that because it helped them sell copy as well. We'll come back to this when we come to talking about the Chicago City Cemetery in a couple of slides from now. My understanding is the first cemetery in Chicago was very near Fort Dearborn, which was one of the first places that you would find anybody in Chicago at all. You can go there downtown today, you'll see in the sidewalk where it says where this is where Fort Dearborn was. What we believe is that the cemetery was right here at kind of this oxbow right here. But we don't know anything about it because we don't believe there were ever headstones, and if there were, this was never something that was thought was going to be permanent. It wasn't until about the 1830s and 1840s that there was a sense of permanency about burial at all. In Europe, for example, especially when it comes to big cities, people would be buried, they would have a spot for usually 50 to 100 years, then they would be put into catacombs where they were put into ossuaries. So this idea of a permanent resting place is a new one for the United States. Chicago City Cemetery. This is the first cemetery I'm aware of that was a significant spot in Chicagoland itself. This is put over where you can find it today. Right about here is where the Chicago History Museum is. This right here is, I think, a softball field. There were a number of people buried here, possibly upwards of 10,000, but many of them were moved. And one of the reasons they were moved was because this was valuable land. It was becoming more and more valuable all the time. We just talked about those that were digging up these graves, though, and suggesting that these were people that were not always seen as being the most prestigious or the most noble. And you could imagine the temptations that might exist to say, well, what if I don't dig up the body, and what if I just move the headstone, or say that I moved it instead? As a result, it's believed that about 1,200 people today are still buried here, especially in this spot right here underneath the softball field. So You can see one example of this. I think I forgot to put a slide in here. I thought 128 was enough, but I guess I should have done 129 of one mausoleum that you can still find in Lincoln Park of the couch burial. It's just a mausoleum. It says the word couch. One person that chose to never be moved at all. Everybody else was, except for the 1,200 that are probably still buried there today. Oh, I did put one in, thank goodness. I forgot that I did that a while ago. So today you can find this very near Lincoln Park Zoo, and you're thinking, this is unusual. It's just a mausoleum here? That's strange. This used to be surrounded by a lot more than just this. Sometimes cemeteries were done with less decorum, and they were done that way because bodies had to be buried quickly. One of the times that this occurs is when there's an epidemic. And many of the epidemics that occurred in lake areas, such as Chicago, would have been cholera. I couldn't find, there's nothing there today. You can see that it's where Harold Washington College is today. But my family and I go to Sandusky every year, and when the kids are having fun, I usually slip out and take a look at this cholera cemetery. It's really small. There's no headstones there except for a couple over here that I believe are from the Civil War. This is a cemetery that people had to be buried very quickly at because cholera, right? In 1837 is when this cholera epidemic occurs in Chicago as a result of one ship, almost like out of Bram Stoker's Dracula. The ship appears, everybody inside is sick, they get out because they can't stay in this boat one more second, and before you know it, a significant portion of Chicago is sick with cholera. So, yeah, today, if you go near Harold Washington College, it's just right across the street. But my understanding is there's no monument, no marker at all. I've never been able to find one. So, some interesting Chicago cemeteries in our area that we can talk about. These are some ones I'll be covering. I'll be covering a couple of other ones besides these because, I don't know, I added stuff and subtracted stuff at the last minute. But there are a couple of big ones on here that I will not be talking about. So sorry about the bad news. I'm not going to be talking about Graceland or Rose Hill. When it comes to like the big cemeteries of Chicagoland, usually the three big ones are Graceland, Rose Hill, and Oakwoods. I'm only going to be talking about Oakwoods. Humble apologies. These are both on the north side, to be fair, and the north side is like kryptonite for Superman for me. I go up there, I have no idea what's going on, I don't know where I am. South side, it's got numbers, I know where I'm at. North side, no such luck for me. So maybe next year we'll do that, I don't know. Troy, what do you think? Next year? There we go. Field trip. Rock and roll. Oakwood Cemetery. Let's do this one first. One of the things about the cemeteries that are in the city is that these used to not be a part of the city. Hyde Park, for example, the community in Chicago that's famous not just for Barack Obama, but also for Pope Leo XIV. That's where he went to school. The only neighborhood in the world that I know of that has both a president and a pope calling itself history. This originally wasn't a part of Chicago. And this was in a far suburb. You would need a train to get there. I'm not going to be going through a lot of the famous burials in these. One of the reasons I'm not going to is there's always people I'm going to leave out, and I feel terrible about it. Another one is there's a great series of people that do this better than I do. I mean, to be fair, most people do better things than I do. But the guy that I know that does it really well is Adam Seltzer, who's got a series of really good books and videos all about the famous people that are buried in this cemetery or that cemetery, or neat things that are going on in other cemeteries as well. Adam Seltzer, cannot recommend him enough. He was the one that before I read his book on H.H. Holmes, I thought like the stuff that you would read in Devil in the White City was true, and he actually went through and combed through the records and said, no, he probably made up a lot of that stuff. So highly recommend his work. First thing you'll notice if you go to Oakwoods, it's on, I think, 87th and about Cottage Grove. It's on the east side. Is you'll see this big clump of stuff right in the front as you go in there. You might think, oh no, is there something terrible? That's from the Chicago fire. So that's an actual piece of, I believe it's wood. I was there maybe like 3 or 4 months ago. I think it's wood. But yeah, you can touch it. You can actually feel the history in your hands. So stuff from the Chicago fire in October 1871. I will go through a couple of famous people here and there, though, just because I would feel amiss if I didn't do at least a little bit. This is Big Jim Colosimo's mausoleum. Colosimo's mausoleum. That's a tongue twister if I've ever had one. Big Jim Colosimo was the original kind of Chicago gangster. Before Al Capone. Al Capone was kind of like a second generation Chicago gangster. His is kind of in a nondescript part of the Oakwood Cemetery itself, with other mausoleums around it to the left and to the right, people I'm not very familiar with. Interesting thing, I believe he died in 1928 or 1929. I believe that inside it says 1930, so it's a miss. The last time I was there, this was a little bit of an older picture. That broken glass had been covered up by like a board. It's funny that somebody that was that rich today, they just fix it with just a board. Jesse Owens, famous American Olympian who really stuck it to the Nazis. He's also buried in Oakwood Cemetery. Enrico Fermi is buried here, too. One of the people that worked on the atomic bomb project. But he's just got a very little headstone. It's a very small spot. But maybe the most interesting thing about this spot is if you come to this, it's on the southern edge of the cemetery itself. Anybody familiar with this? Anybody know what this is? This is a monument to the Confederate war dead. The Chicago Tribune said that this is the largest mass grave in the Western Hemisphere. 4,000 Confederate soldiers buried here. Remember how you're talking about Camp Douglas? That was a place that they interned German Americans in World War I. In the American Civil War, that was a Civil War POW camp as infamous as they came. The only reason probably that the head of it was not put to death was because the Union won the war. Fun little bit of trivia, there was only one person that was executed for war crimes in the Civil War. That was the person that ran Andersonville, the concentration camp in the American South. There are 4,000 people buried here, and I think that they talk about this historiographically as well as I've ever seen. As opposed to talking about the tremendous sacrifice that the soldiers made here, they said essentially that they died for a ruse. They died for a trick. They died for believing something was noble when it was not. And that's about the best way I've ever seen it done. There's a picture of Camp Douglas in its heyday during the American Civil War. Chicago at that time was significantly colder than it is today. And these were people that were put here usually without adequate food, sustenance, clothing, boots. So death from starvation and from exposure was common. I want to say something like 1 in 6 people that was brought here passed away, but don't quote me on that. 19th century headstones are unusual because some of them you can tell they really put in work in ways that they would not have otherwise. These are not from a Sears catalog from my understanding, but you can tell that the thought was that some of these were closer to nature or trying to make a natural look to them. You can also tell from this one, anybody know what this thing is up here? It's the Freemasons. Yeah, in the 19th century, Freemasonry was huge. That was something people would often put on headstones if they were a Freemason. Today, not really a big deal at all. But back then, Freemasonry was a huge part of not just a third space living, but just what a person's identity would be at all if they were a Freemason. Attached to Oakwoods is the Jewish cemetery. And I took these pictures in, I think, 2021. Since that, it's been cleaned up significantly. But this goes to show something else about cemeteries. Despite them lasting forever, a lot of them are essentially left to their own devices. Most people only visit a cemetery for about 10 years after somebody passes. After that, people rarely, if ever, go to visit them at all. This is from a congregation that no longer exists on the south side. And many of the people that are here have no living relatives. As a result, this is a whole cemetery within a cemetery that's essentially been abandoned. Many Jewish headstones sometimes have rocks on the top of them. The symbolism of that is if you visit somebody, you're supposed to put a rock on there. You can see that this is sometimes bilingual in both Yiddish and in English. One of the buildings I found that was associated with it, I'm not sure what's happened to this since. It might have very well been collapsed. It seems like people that are really interested in cemeteries are also really interested in ruined buildings. I'm not sure why. Is that anybody else? I don't know. The next one is the Forest Home Cemetery, formerly called Jewish Waldheim. Waldheim in German is just forest home, so it makes sense, in Forest Park. Another unique part about American history, specifically American labor history. The people that were executed for what was perceived as inciting a riot as a result of the Haymarket riot are buried at Forest Home. There's a memorial today to the Haymarket riot. These were people that were rioting for an 8-hour workday. Here it is today. For the longest time, there was a monument to the police officers, but not to the other people that were killed in the riot. But this is Forest Home Cemetery today. It's kind of near Oak Park. Well, Forest Park was always like the seedier version of Oak Park. Oak Park was designed as a utopian community where there was no alcohol allowed. Forest Park was right next to it. That's where alcohol was allowed. So that's kind of the 5-second long history of Oak Park and Forest Park. This is the monument to the Haymarket rioters. Coins in many places serve the same purpose as the stone does in Jewish cultural tradition. For a long time, prominent leftists, prominent anarchists, prominent social theorists would think that it was extremely noble, extremely honorable to be buried as close as it was to the Haymarket Memorial. So here's Emma Goldman, for example, prominent anarchist. But there's a whole bunch of other ones. Queen of Heaven Cemetery's next. Hillside has a couple of other ones inside of it. There's Queen of Heaven. There's a couple of other ones. Al Capone is buried near here. I don't have a picture of his though. His is just a simple headstone. Most Chicagoans who know about Chicago history in the late 50s know about the Queen of Angels fire. One of these heavy things where 95 people died in a school fire. My understanding is almost all of them are buried in Queen of Heaven Cemetery. Showman's Rest is nearby. This is at Woodlawn Cemetery in Forest Park. This is a different sort of a thing. People that were involved in the circus, people that were involved in traveling shows like this, oftentimes they essentially left their families behind for several reasons. As a result, they kind of acquired a new family, and the new family would be there to take after them, to even provide for their burial circumstances afterwards. In 1919, there was a train derailment involving a series of showmen most of whom lost their lives, and they were all buried in the same spot. Today, circus performers often still do have specific spots in cemeteries, or specific cemeteries just for them. These were people that have, just like I was talking about before, had kind of left their families separate. (1918), I'm sorry. I was like, is it 1919? Many of these, because they were only known to their family that was inside of the circus, died without a name that we know. So, a picture from the service itself. Some have names, but others have something that just looks like this. I couldn't get away with talking about Cemeteries of Chicagoland without talking about the infamous or famous Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. Young people don't tend to know about this as much as older people do, but this is one of these cemeteries that a lot of people know about. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to get there. If you want the GPS coordinates of this place, here they are. It's not going to tell you a heck of a lot as far as how to get there, though, because it is in the middle of a forest preserve. All right, here's how you get there. Step one, you park at Rubio Woods, which is off the Midlothian Turnpike right here. What you're going to do is you see that cell phone tower right there. Be careful. This is just for entertainment and educational purposes only. I'm not suggesting you do this. What you would do is you would cross the street, and over there's another picture of the cell phone tower. You see there's a little inlet right back here? What you're going to do is you're going to walk back there. And you're going to walk back there and you're going to say, what on earth am I doing? I'm in the middle of nowhere. Something is really bad going to happen to me. You walk down a trail for about, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes, something like that. And eventually you will come across a cemetery that is truly forgotten in the middle of nowhere. The name Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, we're not actually sure where it comes from. As I kind of showed you before, there were cemeteries for predominant Germans, predominant Swedish, predominant French, but there were cemeteries that were also specifically for English. And when I say English, I don't mean people from England. I mean pioneers that were already living in the United States. So it's believed that Bachelor Cemetery was an English cemetery. That is, most of the burials here appear to be this way. There is a ghost story associated with it. Some other images from it. Many of the headstones are in poor repair. In the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, this was sometimes a place where young people would go to hang out and get involved in mischief. This is where the ghost story comes from. If you go there today, you'll find that there's one particular monument with all sorts of different things left for it. Oftentimes toys, flowers, dolls, things like this. This is, I'm not sure if you can tell from the picture, this says infant daughter right here. And so there's stories about the mother looking for the infant, or the infant crying in the middle of the woods. Is it okay if I tell you my personal belief? I don't believe that places are haunted so much as I believe people are haunted. But anyway, so this is the ghost story associated with this. This is when I went at a different time, closer to Halloween. If I'm going to talk about ghost stories, I guess I have to talk about Resurrection Cemetery as well, right? The one that most people know, if they know around here, is the story of Resurrection Mary. Resurrection Mary is one of these characters. These are the gates of Resurrection Cemetery, where you would be along Archer Avenue, which is one of the borders of this, and a woman dressed all in white would be stopped by the side of the road. Whenever the person gets out of the car, Resurrection Mary disappears. This is a story that gains prominence in the 1970s when there was a dance hall across the street. It was believed that this was somebody that was looking for a long-lost dance partner. I haven't heard much about it since, but kind of the two big ones in this area are Resurrection Mary, and also, this is not a picture I took. This is just one that I found. I was like, Resurrection Mary. This is one that somebody says they saw. Maybe they did. I don't know. Not here to judge. So, possible picture of Resurrection Mary, but the two big ones are Bachelor's Grove and Resurrection Mary. The ones that I'm much more interested in personally are the pauper and indigent burial sites around. These personally are just ones that are more interesting to me than ones about where Marshall Field is buried, or Potter Palmer, or famous Chicagoans. Maybe, I don't know, but I'll tell you some of the ones that you can find in our area. This is Homewood Memorial Gardens. You can find it. It's off of Halstead, and I want to say it's one of those streets that's beyond like the Chicago grid system. I want to say it's Joe Orr Road, maybe about like 200th Street, but it's right off of Halstead. Homewood Memorial Gardens had a long-seated contract with Cook County to bury the poor and the indigent. These are people that couldn't afford their own burial, or people that didn't have any family that was known. But there were questions about record keeping, about maintenance, and about the burial process in general. One of the times that I went there, I was driving around, and for example, this is what I saw. Many of the headstones and the monuments in the area are kind of poorly maintained. You can see from this that many headstones, if you go into a cemetery, they're kind of in like orderly rows. These are clearly not. Two possibilities. One is that these were people that were buried here and then the headstones were put on after the fact. Or this is sometimes a pauper or an indigent cemetery. Indigent cemeteries often look more like this. There's another one that hasn't been used since, I believe, the 1970s or 1960s. This is a Pottersfield Cemetery in Oak Forest. If you know where the old Oak Forest Hospital is, on 159th and Cicero, there's a trail there today called the Heritage Trail, and one of the things that it does is it goes right by this. You can see this if you go on 159th Street today. This is 159th, that's Pulaski. So if you take a look to your south, you might have seen just like a prairie. That is in fact an old potter's field. That is in fact an old cemetery. For at least 75 years, this is where the indigent and poor of Cook County were buried. It's believed that there are about 4,000 buried here as well, not in a mass grave. You can even see kind of a picture. I wasn't able to find an original image of this, of a priest doing mass services for these all at once. Typically when this happens, the dead are housed in a specific spot and then given one burial at the exact same time. This is the monument in the Oak Forest Prairie today. So you can still see this. It's kind of a nice walk, actually. There's even like a native and indigenous old site of a village in the same hiking trail. I should definitely talk about Burr Oak Cemetery. When it comes to burials that have truly changed the course of American history, it would be difficult to talk about the burial of Emmett Till not fitting this bill. Emmett Till was a young boy who went down into Mississippi to visit some family members and was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by some very racist white people that lived in the area. When his body was brought back, Emmett Till's mother decided to have an open casket funeral despite the extremely decomposed process of her son. Today they're thinking about making the Emmett Hill House in Summit a national monument. This next one, I know you signed up for a cemetery thing. It's not extremely gruesome, but it is difficult to see, so I'm just warning you. The process of doing this turned this into national headlines. And those national headlines ended up creating the civil rights movement, among other things. Burr Oak Cemetery, like many cemeteries, has financial difficulties. One of the reasons that cemeteries have financial difficulties is that, well, typically not a lot of maintenance money comes in after the burials are all done. And Burr Oak, in, I want to say maybe about 10 years ago, was in extremely bad financial shape, and the state of Illinois had to come in to kind of fix things up for them. This is that actual casket that was used in the Emmett Till burial. They didn't bury that actual casket. His burial spot, you can find it right there. I've got the GPS on there, but to be fair, it's in Alsip today. It's at about 127th and Cicero. If you just type in Emmett Till burial location, Google will take you right there. So I was there a couple of different times with my camera, and so this is what it looked like once. This is what it looked like a second time. I believe this one was more in the summer. This one was more in the winter. If this is something interesting to you, they do occasionally still do indigent burials at Mount Olivet, which is in Mount Greenwood. So information on the website right there. I think the last one that I want to talk about, wow, 128 slides went faster than I thought it was going to. The unusual grave of Andreas von Zierngibel. You're thinking that name is already unusual. We're going to get even more unusual, right? This is somebody that had a really interesting life. Andreas von Zerngibbel was a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, fought for the Prussians, decided to make his way to the United States after he lost an arm. He put himself up in the east side of Chicago, right there, where there was essentially nobody living that was a marsh. Decided to become a fisherman, so he's a one-armed Prussian army fisherman living off the southeast side of Chicago. Apparently, over the course of his life, he decided to become kind of like an old wild man, like a get off my land kind of a person. And when he passed away, he made it absolutely clear that he had the title to this land and his family maintained it. After the Chicago fire, a number of these records were lost to time. And so he swore that he had it, but he had died in 1855. His family said they had title to the land, but that title to the land was gone in the Great Chicago Fire. So today, if you want to see his actual headstone, it's in the middle of a stoneworks, and you have to do it by getting like an appointment to go there first. Look around, there's like cranes around, there's all kinds of stuff around, and then there's just this right here. So one of the more unusual burials that I've ever seen. Anybody know anything that's wrong about this headstone? Battle of Waterloo was in 1815. Whoops. Oh well. I don't think he's going to complain. So, I have a bonus track, but before we do that, anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts, anything that I did not get to in this? Question, or thought, or commenter?
You mentioned how some of the headstones have more like nature motifs.
Yes.
Is that like with fashion and all, it kind of changes throughout the decades. Is that the same for headstones as well, or is it dependent on the religion?
Ooh, let me get rid of this first. Yes, headstones definitely go through different fashions. Cemetery practices and burial practices go through different ones as well. For example, in many cemeteries around here, it's becoming very obvious that cremation is going to be more of like the standard as far as burials go. But yeah, headstones, to see headstones that are this big, going back a long ways, sorry. Something like this would be extremely expensive to make. Reason being, you're not going to get this out of a Sears catalog, right? This is going to be something that's probably going to be custom made by a stonemason. It's going to take significant numbers of hours to do. And there's only a very select number of people that can do this out of stone. Something like this, we're going back a long way. I'll find it somewhere. Did I go past it already? I thought it was in Oakwoods. There we go. Oh, these ones. Yes, something like this would tell people looking at it that this person was somebody that, number one, probably liked nature, number two, probably had a lot of money. Why would something like this say, this is money? It's a lot of detail, right? This is something that's very, very hard to carve. So, not quite mausoleum money. Mausoleum money today, as well as in the past, it was essentially like buying a house. So if you take a look at how much a mausoleum costs today, it's around $100,000 to $200,000 for one of these. So yeah, a lot of money. Not quite that expensive, but definitely pretty expensive, very time consuming. And sometimes families would save up for these for years or decades in order to do it. So very costly. Excellent question. Any other questions?
Is that little one supposed to be a chair?
Good question. I would suspect so. Many times in especially late 19th century cemeteries, these were supposed to be, as weird as it seems today, like places to hang out. So you would hang out there, there would be benches there, you would have a picnic there. This was at a time when picnics became very fashionable. And where else would you have a picnic besides in the cemetery? So my hunch is you're right. I'm not 100% sure.
I noticed if you go to Resurrection Cemetery, there are just different cultural parts or ethnic parts
Yes.
that are beautiful.
especially in some different cultures. In Central American cultures, it's much more common, especially right about now that Day of the Dead is coming up, to do this. For other cultures, like for the Irish, for example, less so, right? But yeah, different ones have different relationships with that, certainly. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Anthony.
So, like, what would you say would be, like, the most, it's kind of weird talking about cemeteries like this, but what would be, say, the most interesting one out of, like, all these that you've been to that had, like, say, because I'm looking at the slides and I'm thinking, like, a lot of the more decorative headstones are from, like, the past.
Right.
Like, a lot of headstones are kind of just more simple.
Yes.
I don't think we're ever going to get back to, like, where that picture on the left is going to be. Like, I would just say, like, what would be, like, say the most interesting one that had, like, the oldest or, like, the most decorative headstones that
I think you're 100% right about headstones becoming less formal. I think
that would probably cost, like, $1 million if you wanted to do it today.
zillion.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that this is that headstones like this are very labor intensive. If you're not going to get a standard one that's made usually with a machine, it's going to be extremely labor intensive. And the things today that are becoming much more expensive, it's an economics term called the Baumol effect, is, say, for example, when we think about two industries that have become significantly more expensive, healthcare, education. What's common about healthcare and education? They're both very labor intensive. So labor intensive industries are becoming much more expensive than other things. So I have a feeling that, yeah, the time for these is long past. What it seems like is much more common today is just simple base level, just simple headstones like that. Even those are $2,000 to $3,000 for most people. If I was going to pick out one, and I feel bad because I don't have anything from it at all, I would probably pick Graceland up on the north side. Graceland, it's got some very, very unusual ones. It has a pyramid one. It has some obelisk ones. It has some really, really unusual ones. If you wanted to stay kind of closer to the area, I would say probably Oakwoods. One of the things about Oakwoods was that it had a longer time as a cemetery. I mean, you're still seeing burials there today. Many other cemeteries, they tended to have like extremely quick periods when it was like the 1940s or the 1960s, and so there's just not a whole lot of diversity in what they look like. So I'd say Oakwoods if you're going to be around here, Graceland if you just want one to go to in the area. Any other questions? Thoughts, comments, anything?
Just Bachelor Cemetery, does anyone like watches over it? Because it seemed like the grass is kind of like a golf course work, you know, at least in the picture. So I'm just like, if it's in the middle of the woods.
You know, it's funny. I've been there, I don't know, a couple of times at this point. I would say at least half the times that I was there were at least 2 or 3 other people there. And that's really unusual with cemeteries. Usually you're there and like not a whole lot of people around, right? But if you go there and if you go to Bachelor's Grove, there's almost always somebody there. And I guarantee you if you go there now, it's going to be like, it's going to be packed in a weird kind of way. I suspect somebody must, because otherwise, yeah, it wouldn't look like that. But I've never seen anybody with like a riding lawnmower or anything out there. But, you know, I'm also not there every single day, so who knows. I believe it's still maintained by the Cook County Forest Preserve District, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Yeah, coins. Yeah, coins often serve the same purpose as stones do in Jewish tradition. I doubt anybody left a $50 bill or anything, but usually like a coin or a quarter or a penny or something. It's a way of saying like, I was here. Whew. Maybe I should go back. I don't know. Taking money off of it, that seems like, whether or not you believe in things like that, that seems like a good way to have a horror movie about you. I don't know. Any other questions before I move on to the bonus track? Yes?
Is the common trend of like, so you talk about how a lot of the cemeteries aren't maintained after a while, but
Right.
even when you brought up the point of like how it's been well taken care of, do you think that if cemeteries or even the rises of third spaces were to kind of become more prevalent, that these areas would become well more maintained?
Yes.
Do you think it's like the stronger the community, the more maintained the cemeteries?
I would say definitely. One of the reasons that the Catholic cemeteries tend to be pretty well maintained is because they're associated with Catholic churches and with dioceses and archdioceses and stuff like that. The Jewish cemetery, funny enough, the pictures that I took, I've been told since then, I haven't been back there in a couple of years, is since then a number of volunteers have kind of taken it upon themselves to do the landscaping. So it's supposed to look really nice now. So yeah, but then there's another side of a coin. I was talking with somebody about this. It was about a pioneer cemetery in Manhattan that's been kind of getting overgrown, and he kind of said, like, this is the natural order of things. You know, this is the way nature is reclaiming what had been a human space, and in a way that was kind of comforting as well, in a weird way. So I don't know. Very good question. Thank you. Other questions, comments, thoughts, anything? All right, you ready to go out on a low end? This is going to get dark, so don't say I didn't warn you. The tragic story of Rhoda Derry. I've never actually been here, but I've read enough about it. Rhoda Derry was somebody that was buried in the Bartonville State Hospital just outside of Peoria. And taking a look at her headstone, it's got a really unusual headstone. And you're kind of taking a look at this and you're saying, whoa, that hits kind of hard. What exactly did Rhoda see? What exactly was Rhoda's life like? She lived to 66, which, you know, in 1906 was not a short life. This was Rhoda Derry. Apparently, Rhoda Derry was a victim of 19th and 20th century abuse at the hands of mental health facilities. A lot of times people say, boy, I'd like to go back 100 years and see how things were like. If that's the case, make sure that your mental health is in a pretty good state, because mental health facilities 50 to 100 years or more ago were not the kind of places that you ever wanted to be. I found one article about Rhoda Derry. I'll just share some of it with you without me talking about it. You're like, thank God he's going to shut up. The crib that they're talking about is called a Utica crib. It was a standard form of treatment in the 19th century. This was the almshouse that she was at. The Utica crib is the thing that's on the right. And what would be done with people in a Utica crib is they'd be put in there and they'd stay there for as long as it took. You could understand that Rhoda Derry's experiences in something like this deteriorated dramatically. Maybe we end with how we began, the idea that If anything, the bifurcation when talking about cemeteries reminds us of what's important in life. This was somebody that suffered as few people have ever suffered in life. Thank you, nobody, for commenting on how many different tabs I have open. Those are my emotional support tabs. Yeah, that hopefully in the process of learning about these things, we can do better by the future. That's all I got. Wow, I never thought I'd get done with time extra. So any questions? Thank you so much, everybody. If you want to get a hold of me, that's... Yeah, my email, it's what happens when you got 128 slides. It takes a while to get, there we go. So there's my email address. Thank you so much for being here. You were awesome. Have a wonderful day. Take care, everybody. It's just going to get better from here, right?